The hotel room was in a state of disarray. Nina woke up, her body aching all over. She rubbed her temples and prepared to get up, glancing at the tall figure lying beside her. His handsome face had a chiseled look with deep-set eyes. He was still soundly asleep, showing no signs of waking up. Nina sat up, and the sheet slipped down, revealing faint marks on her pale and sensual shoulders. She got out of bed, and the bloodstains on the sheet were clearly visible. Glancing at the time, realizing she was almost late, she picked up her scattered professional attire from the floor and put it on. Her stockings had been torn by him. She crumpled them into a ball and threw them into the trash, putting on her high heels. At that moment, someone knocked on the door. Nina was already dressed and back in her role as an efficient secretary, grabbing her handbag and heading towards the door. The one who came in was an innocent-looking beauty, someone Nina had called for. This type was what Nash York preferred. Nina said, "You just need to wait for Mr. York to wake up in bed and say nothing at all." She glanced back at the sleeping man on the bed, feeling a surge of bitterness in her heart, but still left the room. Nina didn't want Nash to find out they had slept together the previous night. They had an agreement, a secret 3-year marriage after which they could divorce. During this time there could be no love or any intimate behavior. She had been Nash's personal secretary for 7 years and his wife for 3. Ever since her graduation day she had been by his side, never leaving. It was also on that day that he warned her that their relationship could only be that of superior and subordinate, never to exceed this boundary. Standing by the window in the hallway, Nina was still reminiscing about what happened yesterday. He had held her in bed shouting Mira. Her heart ached violently. Mira was his first love. He had seen her as a replacement for Mira. She understood Nash. He wouldn't want to have any relationship with her. This marriage, which only she had taken seriously, had to end. What happened last night had drawn a full stop to their 3-year marriage. When she checked her phone, a headline caught her attention. Rising singer Miranda Lewis returns to the country with her fiancé. Nina tightly gripped her phone, feeling a surge of bitterness in her heart, her nose stinging with the realization of the truth. Finally, she understood why he had been so drunk last night, why he had cried in her arms. The cold wind blew against her and she smiled bitterly, putting away her phone and taking out a pack of cigarettes from her bag. Lighting one, she held it between her slender index and middle fingers, her lonely and beautiful face shrouded in a haze of smoke. Suddenly, a low growl came from the suite, "Get out," followed by a woman's terrified scream. Moments later, the door opened. Nash sat on his bed with a solemn face, a well-proportioned, muscular figure with a broad chest and clearly visible abs. He looked charming, but his handsome face was dark and his eyes were fierce, hovering on the edge of anger. Nina stepped forward, propped up the lamp, poured a glass of water and put it on the nightstand. "Mr. York, there's a meeting at 9:30. You can get up." Nash's eyes were coldly fixed on the woman, as if he still found it hard to believe. Sensing this, Nina said to the woman, "You can leave now." The woman breathed a sigh of relief, quickly picked up the clothes and walked quickly out, not daring to linger for a moment. Everything was quiet again. Nash directed his gaze back at Nina's face. Nina instinctively handed him water and placed his shirt on the bed. "Mr. York, you can change now."
Nash's expression remained stern, his eyes filled with dissatisfaction as he coldly asked, "Where were you last night?"
Nina was momentarily taken aback. Was he blaming her for not taking good care of him, allowing another woman to take advantage of him, and thus betraying his Mira? Her eyes softened slightly. "Mr. York, you were drunk last night. It was just a moment of intoxication. We're all adults. There's no need to dwell on it." Her repressed emotion conveyed that she would take care of it for him and make sure that no other woman would bother him.
He stared at her, the veins in his forehead bulging. "I'm asking you one last time. Where were you last night?"
Nina felt nervous. I've been dealing with some very demanding projects lately and fell asleep in the office. As soon as she finished speaking, Nash snorted. His face darkened, lips tightly closed as he rose from the bed and grabbed a towel to wrap around himself. Nina watched his departing back, her eyes slightly moistening. In front of her, he always concealed himself as if being seen by her was something disgusting. Last night when he treated her like he did Mira, it was a completely different story. When she came to her senses, Nash had already finished bathing and was standing in front of the full-length mirror. Nina walked over and, as usual, helped him button up his shirt. He stood at 1.88 meters tall, a towering figure, while she was only 1.68 meters. It was somewhat difficult for her to tie his tie. He still seemed angry at himself for his impurity, betrayal of Mira, and refusal to succumb to his cold arrogance. She had to stand on her tiptoes and reach out to loop the tie around his neck.
Just as she was engrossed in tying the tie, Nash's warm breath brushed past her ear, his voice hoarse. "Nina, that woman last night, was it you?"
Nina nearly jumped at the sound of his voice, losing her balance and leaning towards Nash before he steadied her. She recalled last night's scenario. Nina's heart raced as she faced Nash's stern gaze and lowered her head. She didn't dare look him in the eye. "Why are you asking such a question?"
Nash chuckled instead. "You don't have the courage."
Nina's hand froze and her eyelids drooped. Nash secretly hoped it wasn't her after all. Their marriage was only a contractual relationship, and in a few days the agreement would expire. Nina had misbuttoned her blouse, which Nash pointed out, and he impatiently pushed her away. Nina suggested a divorce, and though Nash didn't respond explicitly, he seemed to have given his tacit consent. Nina prepared to return home to fetch meeting documents and the divorce agreement. Upon returning to the York mansion, she was met with Sally's sarcasm, who urged her to have a child and repay the 2 million debts, and even threatened her with divorce if she couldn't. At this moment, a woman emerged from the kitchen and Nina was stunned. It was Miranda. Miranda pretended not to recognize Nina, while Sally was very enthusiastic towards Miranda. When Miranda accidentally scalded her hand with hot tea, Sally hit Nina and locked her up. Nash called Nina to send documents, but Sally sent Miranda instead, saying it would be better if Miranda married Nash and despising Nina as a useless hen. Miranda, full of anticipation, went to deliver the documents to Nash. Nash was waiting for Nina in his office but saw Miranda instead, and was dissatisfied with her appearance. However, Miranda maliciously misrepresented Nina in front of Nash. She said, Nina seemed to be in a bad mood today and she didn't want to come to deliver the documents, so I had to come instead. Miranda placed her scalded hand in front of him and said, Nash, don't blame Nina. I don't think she did it intentionally. I hope it didn't delay you. Miranda hoped to explain her abrupt departure, but Nash interrupted her, saying he needed to attend to work first. Afterwards, Nash showed concern for Miranda's discomfort and offered her medicine. Although Miranda didn't like the taste, she drank it because it was given by Nash. Nina didn't go to the company or take a leave of absence the whole day, which angered Nash. After work, Nash returned home and saw the injured Nina. They argued and she felt like she was unnecessary between Nash and Miranda, deciding to end her 7-year unrequited love for Nash. However, as Nina was about to leave, Nash noticed her scalded hand, which seemed more severe than Miranda's. Just as Nina was preparing to depart, he said, Wait. Nash's concern for Nina's injury and his application of medicine for her gave Nina hope. However, his attitude changed abruptly after receiving a call from Miranda, leaving Nina utterly disheartened. The next day, Nash didn't come to the company, and Nina was assigned to inspect the construction site. It was extremely hot outside, and when she arrived at the site, the temperature was still high. The building under construction was only a framework, not yet formed, and appeared somewhat chaotic. Entering the site, dust and steel bars were scattered everywhere, and the machines emitted deafening noise. Nina had been here a few times and was familiar with it, so she quickly familiarized herself with the surroundings again. But then someone suddenly shouted, "Watch out!" Nina looked up and saw a piece of glass falling towards her head. When she woke up again, Nina was in the hospital staring at the white ceiling, still feeling dizzy and headache-ridden. "Nina, you're awake." Taylor, with red eyes, sat up from the chair and anxiously inquired about her condition. Taylor was Nina's assistant and had been by her side the whole time. Nina had always taken good care of her. She was young and had never encountered such a sudden situation, terrifying her. She touched her forehead, wrapped in white gauze, and it still hurt. Frowning, she asked again, "Is the construction site okay?" She was worried that such a sudden accident would delay their project. "It's fine, Nina. You've been injured so severely, but you're still concerned about the construction site and work hard every day. Even we worry about you. Lie down and rest." Taylor felt guilty, thinking that if she hadn't urged her to go, this accident wouldn't have happened. Nina was already accustomed to it. It seemed that for so many years she had been a workhorse, always thinking of others and the bigger picture, just to make Nash feel at ease. Subconsciously she would care more about work. Moreover, she still owed the York family $2 million, and she believed that working hard was what she should do. At this moment, an excited commotion came from outside, like fans seeing a big star. It turned out that the celebrity Miranda was also in this hospital. Nina saw Nash closely guarding Miranda. Taylor was curious about the relationship between Nash and Miranda, and Nina felt a stinging pain in her heart. After asking Taylor to leave, she called Nash. Nash was very impatient and didn't show concern after learning that Nina was unwell. He even blamed the doctor for causing Miranda pain. After hanging up the phone, Nina was filled with anger, sadness, and resentment, feeling that it was time to end this relationship and give Nash his freedom. When Nina's best friend Yvonne Turner saw Nina's pale face and head wound, she hugged her lovingly. "You were at work, so this must be a work-related injury," Yvonne said. "Where's Nash?" "I don't know." Yvonne noticed that her complexion wasn't good, and it wasn't just due to the injury. She sneered, "You worked so hard for him and your head is injured like this, but your husband is nowhere to be found. He's as good as dead to you. This won't last much longer." "What? Is he going to divorce you?" Yvonne's face changed. "I want to divorce him." Yvonne's attitude changed again. "Then divorce him immediately." She then warned her, "Remember to claim half of the property. Smart women know that the first step is to get the money. With money you won't be afraid of not finding a good man. Find a few and let them serve you diligently every day." But Nina knew that their relationship had been a contract from the beginning, and if they divorced she wouldn't get anything. Yvonne persuaded Nina not to be soft-hearted and believed that Nina had the right to get half or at least 1/3 of the assets. She also said that if Nash didn't agree, they could expose him and make him lose face. Nina decided to go to her friend's house. She didn't want to see Nash and didn't want to return to that house that didn't belong to her. The next morning, Nash returned home and found Nina missing. He didn't ask too many questions and went to work after learning that she hadn't returned the night before. In the office, he learned about the accident at the construction site, which was Nina's responsibility, but couldn't find her. He then called Nina to question where she had been the night before and why she hadn't told him about the accident at the construction site. Nina understood his serious attitude towards work. He wouldn't tolerate even the smallest mistake. But this incident wasn't her fault. He was at the hospital with Miranda last night. She replied, "You said you were busy and hung up the phone," Nina answered. Nash emphasized his secretary's duties and demanded her immediate presence in the office, while Nina insisted that the accident was not her fault. Meanwhile, Yvonne had delivered the divorce agreement to Nash's company, demanding a substantial division of assets. In the CEO's office, Nash saw the divorce agreement and got very angry. Company employees were tense, not knowing what had happened. Nash questioned why he hadn't been notified of the workplace accident promptly, assuming it was Nina's oversight. Taylor informed him that they couldn't reach him and that Nina had been injured in the accident and was hospitalized with a concussion. Nash was stunned. He had no idea Nina had been hurt in the accident. Nina, with a head injury, insisted on coming to work. She and Nash were in a secret marriage. Nash was angry upon seeing the contents of the divorce agreement, accusing Nina of wanting a child just to tie him down. Nina was surprised and embarrassed by the contents of the agreement. She tried to explain that it was the wrong document that had been sent, but Nash didn't believe her. Nina felt that Nash didn't understand her and was disappointed in him. Nina finally stated that the divorce was to prematurely terminate their 3-year marital contract. Nash, however, said he had the final say and that the marriage couldn't end without his consent. Nina returned to the York residence to pack her bags and move out. At that moment, Sally and her sisters were playing cards. Seeing Nina, Sally accused her of spending lavishly, mentioning a $20,000 expenditure on women's clothing. Nina denied it, but Sally didn't believe her and continued to call her a gold digger. Nash appeared and claimed that he was the one who spent the money buying clothes for Miranda, and then said it was a loan to Miranda, warning Sally to mind her own business. After hearing Nash's words, Nina decided to leave the house. She was packing her bags when Nash saw her. "Where are you going?" "Home," Nina said. "Isn't this your home?" Nash's tone cooled noticeably. Nina felt a pang in her heart upon hearing his words, but she still looked up at him and said, "Do you really think this is my home? I'm just making room for you all." Suddenly Nash grabbed her hand. Stopping her from packing, he said coldly, "How long are you going to insist on this?" Nina didn't dare to look up, afraid she would appear vulnerable and start crying. This was the first time she had pushed him away so forcefully. "I'm not making a fuss. I'm serious. Nash, please let go. I need to pack." Her insistence on divorce left Nash with a difficult expression. Bang! The door closed. In his anger, Nash tried to have intimate relations with Nina, who refused him. Nash's demeanor turned cold, saying that marriage was just a transaction before leaving. Nina felt disappointed and cold, reflecting on their marriage. Later, she was awakened from sleep by a figure hugging her tightly. His body was warm, carrying a strong smell of alcohol. His hot breath lingered by her ear. Had he been drinking? "Nash," Nina called out. But Nash wrapped his arms around her waist, buried his head in her hair and whispered, "Don't move. Let me hold you for a while." Nina remained still. She didn't understand why he had drunk so much. Nina lay under the covers for a long time, her body almost stiff, wondering when he would get up. But he showed no signs of getting up, just greedily clinging to her. Hadn't he mistaken her for Miranda again? Nina called out again, "Nash? I just want to lie like this for a while, Nina." Upon hearing these words, Nina fell silent again. The fact that he called her by her name meant he didn't mistake her for another woman. She rarely saw him like this and she felt somewhat at a loss. But her heart softened, worried that he might fall asleep like this and catch a cold. She nudged him, saying, "Don't sleep like this. Go take a shower or cover yourself properly." Nash rolled over, lifted his arm and scooped Nina and the blanket into his embrace. He hugged her tightly, filling her nostrils with his scent, the smell of alcohol and his fresh smell. Meanwhile, she felt flustered, her gaze meeting his. His eyes were open, his deep gaze fixed on her, his brows slightly furrowed. Nash's hand stroked her forehead. The warmth from his large hand gave her a strange feeling. She tilted her head slightly and Nash paused, asking carefully, "Does it hurt?" Nina's nose tingled, perhaps overwhelmed by too many grievances. She couldn't hold back her emotions. "Why are you asking these things?" Her words carried a hint of complaint. Nash patted her back, seemingly to soothe her emotions. I won't let you go to such dangerous places anymore. Did he really care about her? Just moments ago he had said their marriage was just a transaction and told her not to think too much. Nina couldn't help but look at him again. This time he had closed his eyes, but his hand continued to comfort her. At that moment Nina felt like he belonged to her. Only when he was drunk did their relationship feel more intimate, like that of an ordinary couple. Nina raised her hand, wanting to touch his face, wanting to get closer to him. But her hand hovered in mid-air. Ultimately, reason overcame her impulse. She knew very well that this was just a fleeting moment. Everything would return to normal tomorrow morning. He was Nash and she could only be Nina. Her hand fell back to her side. She pressed her face against his chest, feeling his heartbeat and listening to his steady breathing. He must be asleep. She finally sighed with relief and said, Nash, if I were the person you love even just a little bit, I would be very happy. She was actually easy to please, but receiving Nash's love was a luxury for her. Finally, Nina also closed her eyes, hoping time would stop so she wouldn't have to wake up. However, dreams must eventually end. When she woke up the next day, the quilt was cold and Nash had left early. After getting up, Nina found a note by the bedside, scribbled with a few lines. I'm going to the office. Rest at home and remember to eat well. Beside it was a bank card. Nina picked it up and thought of the $20,000 he had spent on Miranda yesterday. Did he think she knew about his expenses and was trying to compensate her in this way? She didn't know what Nash was thinking. Why love Miranda but not divorce? What was the point? In fact, divorce meant starting a whole new life, which had exhausted all her courage. Nash would never know why she fell in love with him or why she willingly stayed by his side for 7 years, dedicating her best years and happiest moments to him. The thought of separating hurt her heart. She had used up all her courage but ended up with nothing. One should stay awake and not sacrifice everything for a man. However, Nina found out she was pregnant. They had no protection that night when Nash, drunk, mistook her for Miranda. Ironically, Nash believed the woman from that night wasn't Nina. By the evening, Nina fell asleep exhausted, drifting into a dream. Nash and a lawyer entered the room. The lawyer took out a document from his briefcase and placed it on the table like he was completing a task. Miss Walker, this is the divorce agreement between you and Mr. York. An apartment near your workplace has been purchased for you, and this villa is also yours. Additionally, you will receive $4 million in compensation. Please review the agreement carefully and let us know if there's anything you need to add. As long as this marriage can be dissolved, that's all that matters. Nina picked up the divorce agreement, flipped through it, and verified Nash's signature. She felt ridiculous, as if she needed to authenticate the agreement even though Nash was right in front of her. It felt like fate was playing a cruel joke on her, not giving her a perfect ending but rather a tragic one. She looked at Nash, but his gaze had turned icy. He looked at Nina like a machine without emotions, saying brutally, Nina, you guessed right. You're worthless now. Don't overestimate a man's feelings. He'll like you one moment and dislike you the next. It's not strange at all. You overestimated my feelings for you. A marriage proposal means nothing. I can propose to you and I can propose to other women. Does it matter? Upon hearing this, Nina tightened her fists. Despite being prepared, her eyes welled up with tears, asking, What about the baby? Don't you feel anything? Nash's lips curled into a sneer. Do you think you can fool me? Let me raise someone else's child? Do you think I'm that naive? The baby is yours. Nina insisted. The baby in my belly is yours. Nina had hoped that telling her husband she was pregnant might change his heart. But she was wrong. When a man decides to be ruthless, a child means nothing. Nina, Nash interrupted her. I never touched you. Nina awoke from her dream with a gasp, sitting up and pondering over everything in the dream. Nash's gaze was so cold and his words were so ruthless. It was time for her to leave. She cooked Nash his last meal herself, unaware of his impending fate. Under the dim lighting, Nash's deep gaze fixed on Nina as she approached slowly. She wasn't wearing her usual serious professional attire but a white sweater and loose pants. Her fair skin glowed against the sweater, her lips curled into a hint of delight, her hair casually tied back, adding a touch of gentle beauty to her aura. Nash found himself unwittingly mesmerized by her appearance. He noticed that Nina looked even more beautiful now. How had he not noticed before? Nina served the dishes onto the table and asked, "Would you like some wine?" Nash snapped out of his reverie and nodded. "I'll get some red wine for you." Nina hurried to the wine cabinet. Nash's gaze remained fixed on Nina until she returned with the wine, poured it into his glass and placed it in front of him. Once everything was ready, Nina finally sat down. She had filled her glass with juice and toasted Nash proactively. "Let's have a drink before we start eating." After saying that, Nina took a sip. Then Nina passed the food. "Why aren't you eating? Don't you like the dishes I made?" Nash watched her scoop food into his bowl, paused, then looked up at Nina and picked up his cutlery. "I told you before you started cooking that I'd eat whatever you made." He took a bite of the food Nina had placed in his bowl right in front of her. She watched Nash for a long time, his handsome profile and the way he enjoyed his food making her smile, though a peculiar emotion flickered in her eyes. "You need to eat regularly every day," Nina advised. "No matter how busy you are with work, you can't skip meals. Money can be earned slowly, but your health is precious. You only have one body. If you damage it, it will take a long time to repair." Nash turned around, his large hand gently stroking her head, asking cautiously, "Don't worry, with you around, no matter how busy I am, you'll call me, right?" His life revolved around Nina. She handled most things, and as long as she was there, he had nothing to worry about. "Yes," Nina replied, meeting his gaze. "But I can't be with you forever. People always leave. I'm here now, but eventually I must go too. No feast can last indefinitely." Nash paused, his expression darkening. "Are you saying you want to leave?" Nina smiled. "You already know, don't you?" Nash's face changed, and the cutlery clattered to the ground as his head felt heavy, Nina's face blurring before his eyes. Nash felt his strength slowly ebbing away. Nina remained calm and poured herself another glass of juice. She looked at Nash, her eyes brimming with tears. "Just have a little. It won't harm you and will help you sleep better." Nash grasped Nina's sleeve, his vision growing dim. He struggled to sit up, breathing heavily, stammering, "Can you stay?" Nina met his gaze, seeing his genuine hope for her to stay, but she firmly pulled her hand away. "Thank you for taking care of me for these 7 years. Even without me, you'll find another secretary. No one is indispensable in this world. You need someone who can take care of you, someone obedient. I believe many people can do it, but I can't anymore." If she continued to be Nash's secretary, it would certainly be suitable. But she was greedy, wanting his love. Continuing like this, they would only grow unhappier, and not even a shadow of their good times would remain. "Nina." Nash was emotional, but the medication kicked in faster. He stared at her intently. "You're leaving me, to go to your Zach?" Nina didn't speak, but she mustered her courage. Under his piercing gaze, she reached out to touch his handsome face. She looked at him, searching for traces of Zach in him. Zach was the name Nina had given Nash before she knew his real name. But at this moment he was Nash. She remembered his determined spirit, how despite being severely injured, he had rescued her from the clutches of criminals. She once owed him her life, but she had paid it back because she had also saved him. Nina remembered everything about him vividly. From junior high school onward, her gaze had always followed him through high school and college. Nash had been in her life for 7 years, while she had been in his for 14. It was a sweltering afternoon. The school was organizing a play and she had a role to play. Always diligent, she arrived at the auditorium half an hour early to practice her lines repeatedly. The moment she entered, she was hit by a strong scent of blood. Uneasy, she followed the smell to the dressing room filled with costumes for school performances. Heavy breathing came from inside. Terrified, thinking it might be a thief, she grabbed a baseball bat behind the door, lifted the clothes and found him pale as if he might die the next second. Nina was shocked and horrified to discover him lying among the clothes, covered in blood. Panicked and afraid, she quickly applied pressure to stop the bleeding. He had been stabbed in the abdomen. The wound wasn't too deep, but the bleeding could be fatal. Nash, with all his remaining strength, grasped her arm. His eyes barely open from exhaustion, he weakly said, "Don't let anyone know." She didn't know how he had been injured, but she understood he didn't want anyone to know what he was doing. After all, this was school, and if someone were stabbed, it would surely become news across the entire campus, drawing people's attention. Keeping it a secret, she helped him stop the bleeding. Then he passed out. By noon, students would go to the auditorium for rehearsals, and this lounge area was usually empty unless there was an important performance. The scent of blood was too strong, so she sprayed a lot of disinfectant in the auditorium to mask it. During rehearsals, she was worried about him and distracted, getting scolded by the teacher several times. It wasn't until rehearsals ended that she rushed to check on him, but he was gone. Even the bloodstains were missing, as if nothing had happened. If not for the red mark on her arm, she would have thought it was all a dream. Zach only existed in the past. From fantasy to eventually becoming a joke. Nash could never be Zach again. Nina pulled herself out of her memories and looked into his eyes, which were about to lose consciousness. Zach doesn't matter anymore. At this moment we owe nothing to each other. But she would never forget that he once occupied an important place in her heart. No matter how unwilling Nash was, he eventually lost consciousness. Nina finished the last drop of juice in her glass and clinked her glass against his one last time. Let this be their joyful farewell. Before leaving, she placed the divorce agreement back on the table, next to 2 tickets to Frangelia. But these tickets weren't for her and Nash. They were for him and Miranda. She wanted him to know that she had given him his freedom. Frangelia, such a romantic place, was more suitable for him and his beloved. After doing what she needed to do, Nina packed her bags and left the house.
The next day, Nash gradually regained consciousness, but his head still felt heavy, as if pressed down by a large rock. He rubbed his forehead, feeling a splitting headache. Yet he remembered Nina cooking for him the previous day. He abruptly stood up, his cold gaze scanning the surroundings. But there was no sign of Nina. "Mr. York, are you all right? Do you need to go to the hospital?" Quincy asked with concern, noticing Mr. York's pale complexion. Nash didn't respond but stared at the divorce agreement on the table, along with the 2 air tickets. He clenched his fists, the joints cracking, and nonchalantly stood up. "Clean this up, and let's go to the office." Quincy noticed Nash's indifference to Nina's situation and asked, "Mr. York, are you really going to ignore it?" Nash glared at him coldly. "Didn't you hear what I said? Let's go back to the office now." Quincy didn't say anything further. Nash groomed himself, changed into a suit, and headed to the office on time as usual, as if nothing in his life had happened. After Nina left, it was as if she had never existed. Thus, several days passed peacefully. The person Nash sent to investigate Nina's whereabouts had some information. "Mr. York, I found out about Miss Nina's recent activities." Nash felt even more annoyed upon hearing this, and coldly said, "It's not necessary to pursue it now. I'm not interested in her." The person on the other end of the phone had spent a lot of effort to find the answer, and he didn't want things to end like this. He seriously told Nash, "Understood, Mr. York, but I think you should know this. This might be the biggest secret Miss Nina kept from you." Upon hearing this, Nash froze, his dangerous gaze narrowing. "What secret?" Sensing Nash's continued interest, the informant truthfully replied, "Miss Nina visited the hospital several times. The doctors and nurses were tight-lipped about her visits, indicating that Miss Nina insisted on confidentiality. However, we managed to obtain surveillance footage of Miss Nina's visits, and it seems she went to the gynecology department. This answer left Nash stunned, unable to process it at first. Their marriage had always maintained boundaries. He had never touched her, and even if he wanted to, he wouldn't force her if Nina didn't agree. Their marriage had an unbridgeable rift, and he had to give her the utmost respect. Until now, Nash didn't dare to speculate wildly. The more he thought about it, the deeper the turmoil in his heart, as if an invisible net enveloped him. Nash returned to the bedroom and opened the door, allowing a gust of cold wind to blow in. The room was empty, with no sign of Nina. He stood at the doorway, silently lost in thought, remembering how Nina used to be by the bedside. She would either be engrossed in her phone or focused on reading a book. Nash's gaze lingered on the bed for a long time before suddenly seeing Nina sitting on the bed in her pajamas, looking at him. A hint of surprise appeared on his face, and he was about to walk over to embrace her. But she disappeared, and his hand hung in midair, realizing it was just his illusion. Nina never came back. She had left. The bedroom without Nina felt so cold that he couldn't bear it. He walked out and went to the study, using his phone to play a video and project it onto the computer screen. Nina's route in the hospital was indeed to the gynecology department. She spent about 20 minutes inside and came out holding several pieces of paper. Although it wasn't clear what was written on the papers, Nash watched Nina tear them into shreds and throw them into the trash can. However, Nash noticed someone else in the video. The person spoke with Nina for a few moments and seemed familiar. Nash vaguely remembered him as someone from the company. After Nina left, he was digging through the trash can. Nash frowned at his behavior, but only he knew the truth. So Nash quickly found that person, who told him that Nina was pregnant, evidenced by the ultrasound results he saw Nina shred. Nash clenched his fists and gritted his teeth, suppressing his anger. He finally understood why Nina had run away. She was pregnant. He didn't know whose child she was carrying, but she definitely didn't want to stay by his side. She wanted to run away with her unfaithful lover. He felt humiliated. Nash had a stern and furious expression, silent and seething. He stood up and rushed out quickly. How dare she betray him? Even if she fled to the ends of the earth, he would bring her back.
Meanwhile, Nina on the other side sneezed and tears welled up in her eyes. She wiped them away with a tissue and continued writing her documents. She worked as an editor at the television station and had chosen this job due to her keen interest in news. After work, Nina took a break in the square, enjoying the lively atmosphere. She gently touched her stomach and a faint smile appeared at the corner of her lips, knowing that she wouldn't be alone for much longer. She got up and headed home. The road was deserted, with hardly anyone passing by, only dim street lamps casting long shadows. Suddenly, Nina noticed another shadow being cast by the street lamp. She took a step forward and the person behind her took a step forward too. She stopped and so did the person behind her. A feeling of unease crept over her and she instinctively quickened her pace, keeping her head down. But as she speeded up, the person behind her also accelerated, quickly catching up. She was just about to grab her bag for self-defense when the person grabbed her hand. She kicked her legs, but he used his arm to encircle her waist and lift her up. Nina screamed in terror. In her desperation, she pounded on the man's back and shouted, "Who are you? Let me go, let me go." The man ignored her words and continued walking quickly despite her hits and curses. Nina was anxious and unable to think clearly, only thinking about breaking free from his clutches. She had only been here for a few days and was unfamiliar with the environment. She didn't know if there were thieves or criminals around and was afraid of getting hurt. Her first reaction was to escape the danger. But no matter how much she pounded, the man showed no intention of harming her. This didn't seem like the behavior of a criminal, and although she was shouting loudly, he didn't seem afraid at all. Could it be? Just as she was about to figure it out, she found herself gently set back on the ground. When she looked at his face, Nina's expression changed drastically. You. But before she could finish her sentence, Nina realized that their relationship had deteriorated to this extent, and there was no point in continuing the conversation. She tightly closed her lips, unwilling to face him, and quickly turned to leave. You run away from me when you see me? Guilty conscience. The man said coldly. Nina stopped and pondered another question. He had never come to look for her during the days she had been away. It was reasonable for him to sign the divorce agreement and move on with his life. If he wanted to find her, he would have found her already. I think I've made it clear. The divorce certificate has been processed and signed. You're free now. Why are you looking for me? Things have already gone far enough. Or have you already set a time to register the divorce together? Nina asked tentatively. She was standing with her back to him, unable to see his expression and emotions, only hearing his footsteps getting closer and closer. She had no intention of running away. Even if she wanted to, as long as Nash wanted to catch her, he would find her no matter how far she ran. Listening to the footsteps getting closer, Nina instinctively swallowed, holding her breath until the familiar scent came beside her. She felt a hand choking her neck and quickly pressing her against the wall. She was trapped, surrounded by his cold breath. Danger and excitement made her forget to breathe for a moment, her gaze fixed on Nash's handsome face. His icy gaze locked onto hers and his cold lips parted. Divorce? Nina, you really have guts. His hand tightened as if he wanted to choke her to death. Nina also felt his anger and the suffocating feeling of his hand choking her neck. She struggled to speak. Nash, what do you want? Will strangling me satisfy you? Nash's gaze was sharp as he said coldly, should I strangle you? The disgrace you've brought upon me, your infidelity has embarrassed me. Just thinking about her being intimate with another man behind his back, and having another man's child in her belly, filled him with infinite anger. He wanted to kill her and her lover on the spot. But Nina didn't understand. She furrowed her brows and continued to defend herself. Don't talk nonsense. When did I ever embarrass you? Our divorce was agreed upon in the contract. I abided by the contract, and you? How do you explain the child in your belly? Nash almost shouted, his eyes flashing with anger. Upon hearing his words, Nina's pupils dilated suddenly. He had suddenly discovered that she was pregnant, catching her off guard, and she couldn't give a reasonable explanation at once. Seeing her astonished expression, Nash knew it was all true. He sneered, not speaking? You're the first person to betray me in my life. How should I punish you? Facing Nash's fierce gaze, she felt as if he wanted to devour her alive. She dared not tell him the truth, covering her stomach with one hand and saying, Nash, even if I'm pregnant, I haven't violated our agreement that you wouldn't interfere in my life. I hope you'll keep your promise. Besides, almost no one knows about our marriage. Even if we divorce and you remarry, it won't affect you. Who's the father of the child? Nash asked through gritted teeth. Nina's hands trembled uncontrollably and she didn't dare to look at him. It's none of your business. It's definitely not yours. Then who is it? Nash was curious about this person who had never appeared before but whom Nina was willing to protect. It's my private matter. There's no need to tell you, Mr. York. It's already very late. I need to rest. I have work tomorrow. Saying this, Nina avoided his hand and only wanted to escape. Now that he knew she was pregnant, she was worried about the safety of her unborn child. She didn't want to lose the child. Seeing her try to leave, Nash's face darkened and he pulled her back, holding her tightly in his arms. Nina began to struggle, trying to break free from his restraint, and her emotions were somewhat agitated. Let me go. We're no longer related. Don't harass me anymore. I'll call the police if you keep this up. Her rejection only made Nash angrier. He grabbed her shoulders, his tone sharp. Is this man really that important to you? You like him, but he's never been by your side when you needed him. What's so appealing about him? He can't even support you and your child, forcing you to work and appear in public. What's there to like about him? He's just a coward. Nash. Nina shouted loudly, staring at him with a cold gaze. Every word she spoke was deliberate. Even if he leaves, disappears, and I never see him again in this lifetime, he's someone I've loved. I won't allow you to speak ill of him. Nash rarely saw Nina with such a cold gaze, especially for another man. Jealousy welled up within him. He tightly hugged her and forcefully kissed her lips. Nina didn't expect him to be so forceful. She pushed against his chest with all her strength, trying to break free. But Nash wouldn't allow her to resist. He held her hands above her head. Nina struggled, trying to avoid his advances and pounding on his chest with all her might. Nash pressed her against the wall, his hands sliding under her dress along her waist. Slap. Nina hit Nash hard across the face. Nash didn't flinch, receiving her slap head-on. A bright red mark appeared on his face. He tilted his head and stared coldly at Nina. Nina was also shocked to see her hand. She had hit him hard and her hand hurt. In the 7 years they were together, they had also had conflicts, but she had never laid a hand on him before. Nina. Nash's voice was filled with threat. Nina pulled her numb hand out and explained, I didn't mean to. If you didn't lose your temper, I wouldn't have hit you. Nash was furious. Nina had the audacity to leave him and even dared to hit him. His clenched fists crackled with tension. His furious expression sent shivers down Nina's spine, fearing he might strike her back. But Nash merely stared at her coldly. You'd do anything for this man. Nina wouldn't reveal the truth about the child. She didn't want to be with him. This child was her own decision. Although her actions seemed selfish, she believed ending the relationship was better than being entangled in his affair with Miranda. If he found out she was pregnant, he might insist on an abortion or decide to keep the child. Neither option was what she wanted. She couldn't soften her heart. Even if he decided to keep the child today, who could guarantee he wouldn't ask for a divorce and deprive her of custody after the child was born? She couldn't allow that to happen. She couldn't trust Nash to coexist peacefully with her. She had conceded too much in the past, but this time she would not. Nina calmed down and looked at him, confessing, You're right, I'd do anything for him. Nash couldn't help but feel jealous hearing her say that. She was willing to go to such lengths for a villain, even carrying his child. His icy gaze fixed on her belly and he said cruelly, If I ask you to get rid of this child? Nina instinctively stepped back, clutching her belly, and said coldly, You might as well kill me too. Hearing her words, Nash gritted his teeth with frustration but was powerless. She was so stubborn and insisted on keeping the child. How could he allow her to do this? I won't allow you to keep this child. You must get rid of it. No. You have no choice. Nash grabbed her hand, his voice icy. I won't allow you to keep this child. Nina panicked. Why did he still want to control her? Why did he want to take away her last possession? She wouldn't allow him to do this. Desperate, her eyes red, she picked up a nearby brick and held it to her head. If you try to get rid of my child, I'll kill him now. Her attitude was resolute, both a warning and a threat. The child was more important to her than her own life. She was willing to bet her life on it. Nash tightly gripped her hand, almost breaking it. At that moment he hated her so much, hated her perseverance and stubbornness, just like the day she left without hesitation, only thinking about disappearing from his life. She dared to carry someone else's child. How dare she say such things to him? Finally, Nash let go of her hand, no longer forcing her, but his gaze was icy, full of disappointment towards her. Nina, you'll regret this. His words were firm and decisive. After saying that, he ignored Nina's sad expression. Tears glistening in her eyes showed her strong will. A tear rolled down her cheek, indicating she wouldn't yield to him. Nash left without looking back, disappearing from Nina's sight. Nina slowly collapsed to the ground. Her hand was painful, but it paled in comparison to the pain in her heart. Her eyes were lowered, filled with unspeakable sorrow. She was alone. However, this loneliness was not what she initially wanted. After years of disappointment, she felt that loneliness was better, and ending the marriage was also a good thing. Originally, she thought her life would be better, easier, and freer without wasting her love. But then Nash reappeared in her life, dragging her back into that abyss. Yes, she didn't want to live in this uncertain state anymore. Her choice was right, she couldn't regret it. Nina wiped away the tears that shouldn't have fallen, stood up, summoned her courage and forced a smile. Her days wouldn't be too bad, they would only get better. She hoped Nash would understand they weren't suitable anymore and stop coming for her. She also believed that after this, Nash wouldn't come for her again, since men were very prideful and cared about their reputation. Meanwhile, Nash sat in his car, his face as cold as ice. He commanded, "Find him even if we have to turn the whole city upside down." This man had given him such a huge humiliation, yet Nina was willing to risk her life to protect him. He had to kill this man. One day, Nina walked alone on the street after work. She didn't call a taxi immediately. After sitting for so long, she needed to stretch her legs. Recently, she noticed her belly had grown a bit. She touched it, smiling as she thought about growing together with the child inside. She didn't notice a car quietly following her from a distance. After a while, Nina prepared to hail a taxi to go home. A taxi slowly approached and stopped in front of her. She got in and gave an address. The car started moving again slowly. Inside the car, Nina smelled a strong perfume. She looked towards the driver's seat. The driver turned her head, seemingly trying to hide her face. This aroused Nina's suspicion. Hello. Hello. It was indeed a woman. Although Nina had seen female drivers before, it was still unusual for a female driver to cover her face so thoroughly, which heightened her vigilance. A driver who sprays perfume should care about their appearance, so covering their face seemed contradictory, and it was uncommon for female drivers to spray perfume while driving. These behaviors made Nina feel uneasy. Nina said, "I suddenly have something to do. Just let me off here." "Aren't you going home? The car has already started moving. It's not good to cancel now. I'll quickly take you home." Nina's face changed. "How do you know I'm going home?" The driver hesitated, then smiled. "It's so late. You must be going home from work." Nina didn't believe it. Which taxi driver would ignore a passenger's request? "Let me out, I need to get out right now." The driver didn't respond. As the car speeded up, Nina's feeling of unease intensified. "Didn't you hear me? I want to get out." Realizing the danger, Nina knew the driver deliberately picked her up, and what happened next would be unpredictable. She boldly grabbed the steering wheel. "Let me out." The driver was prepared and hit Nina's shoulder. Nina immediately lost consciousness. After Nina fainted, the female driver took off her hat, revealing a victorious smile. The female driver transferred the unconscious Nina to the trunk. The female driver's name was Scarlett. She was a member of a human trafficking organization. Confined in the trunk, Nina gradually regained consciousness as the car rocked. She stared in horror, breathing rapidly, clutching her hands tightly, drenched in cold sweat. When she regained consciousness, she found herself still in the narrow, dark space. She hugged her head trembling and screamed, "No." The car came to an abrupt halt. Nina's scream echoed through the vehicle, causing its occupants to instinctively stop. They wondered if they had misheard. "Did you hear that?" Scarlett asked. "I think so." "Could she be awake?" her assistant said. "Impossible," Scarlett replied. "I gave her a heavy dose. She shouldn't wake up this soon." The car started moving again, but suddenly 5 military vehicles appeared ahead. Realizing something was wrong, Scarlett shouted, "Quick, turn around." Her assistant floored the accelerator and jerked the steering wheel, speeding in the opposite direction. They had gone to great lengths to capture her. They wouldn't give up easily. If Nina wasn't dead, then Scarlett would be. They're getting closer. What should we do? The assistant pressed harder on the accelerator. Scarlett furrowed her brow. Just keep driving. I'll handle them. She pulled a pistol from her waistband. Seeing this, the assistant warned, Are you crazy? Those are 5 military vehicles. If you shoot, they'll turn us into Swiss cheese. Scarlett sighed helplessly. We have no other choice. Scarlett opened the car door and fired a shot at the pursuing vehicles. The military vehicles were bulletproof, sustaining minimal damage. Then, bang, bang, bang. Several shots shattered their car windows. This won't work. We can't fight 5 vehicles at the same time. We need backup, the assistant said. I know, I've already called for help, Scarlett replied. The military vehicles continued to close the distance. Captain York, we blew out one of their tires, but they won't stop, reported the man in camouflage beside Nash. Nash sat inside, his eyes fixed on the vehicle ahead, a serious expression on his face. All with him were his former comrades in arms. He was their captain. Therefore, even though Nash was no longer in active military service, people still addressed him as Captain York. A bodyguard who had secretly been stationed near Nina reported that she had been kidnapped. So he mobilized his own forces to rescue Nina. He would never let them escape punishment. Keep pursuing, Nash said seriously. There are others in the car. Be careful. Puncturing all 4 tires would stop them, but Nina was in the car and he couldn't take that risk. If anything happened to them, Nina would also be in danger and she was pregnant. They could only continue the high-speed chase. As they approached the bridge, Scarlett's assistant said, We're almost there. Once we cross this bridge, we'll be safe. Scarlett watched the military vehicles getting closer and closer. It's not going to be that easy. With only 3 tires, they were much slower. A few minutes later, the military vehicles caught up. The assistant looked in the rearview mirror. What should we do? Scarlett glanced at the rapid river flowing beneath the bridge, wondering if killing Nina would suffice to complete the mission. They needed to eliminate Nina first to stop the pursuit. Scarlett told her assistant to stop the car and quickly got out to open the trunk. Nina was curled up, shivering. The sudden sunlight was blinding. She covered her head with trembling hands. Scarlett pulled her out. Nina was in a daze, staring blankly, until she saw her feet dangling over the rapid river below. No, Nina clung tightly to Scarlett's arm. Scarlett looked at Nina's pale face and said, I'm sorry, but you have to die. If you don't, many others will. Bang. A gunshot rang out, urging her to act quickly. Scarlett gritted her teeth and looked at Nina. I'm sorry. Her grip loosened gradually. Nina didn't want to let go, she wanted to live. But suddenly, Scarlett placed Nina's hands on the railing. Nina looked at Scarlett in shock. It's up to you to decide your fate. This is all I can do to help, Scarlett said. Nina clung to the railing, her feet hanging in midair with no support, struggling to hold on. Nina. Nash saw her hanging there and rushed forward without hesitation. Captain York, this is dangerous. His men tried to stop him, but Nash had only Nina on his mind. He knew if he didn't go, she would fall. If he fell, she would die. He pushed them aside and ran towards her. Just as Nina was about to plummet, a pair of hands grabbed her. Nina. Nina looked up and saw Nash, who was trying to pull her up, his face full of concern. Why are you here? Nina shouted. The gunshots are too loud. It's too dangerous. You have to leave. Nash gave her a reassuring look. It's okay. I'll get you out first. Nina saw where Scarlett had escaped, surrounded by many armed men, obviously not ordinary people. No, there are too many of them. They'll target you. I'll be fine. I can hold on. Tears almost welled up in her eyes. Nash tightly held her hand and smiled reassuringly. Don't worry. I'll protect you. I won't let anything happen to you. Tears welled up in Nina's eyes. No. I don't want you to be in danger. Nash ignored her pleas and quickly pulled her up. When Nina realized that Nash was risking his life to save her, her tears fell. She felt guilty for involving him. Nash pulled her up and hugged her tightly, shielding her from bullets. Don't be afraid. I'm here. I'll get you out of here. Gunshots rang out next to her ears and Nina felt bullets flying past her face. She was terrified and worried about Nash's safety. At this moment, all she could do was pray that everything would be all right. She hugged Nash tightly. "Let's go. We have to leave here." Meanwhile, one of the enemy gunmen aimed at Nash. Bang! A gunshot rang out. Nina clung tightly to Nash's clothes, not daring to turn around, fearing the worst. Then she heard Nash's low voice in her ear. "It's okay. Don't be afraid. We'll be safe soon." His words gave Nina the strength to keep going. When they returned to the military vehicle, Nina's heart was still pounding wildly. Everything happened so quickly that she hadn't had time to react. She clung to Nash's sleeve and kept asking, "Are you okay? Really okay?" Nash sat up straight and placed his hand over Nina's to comfort her. "I'm fine. Don't worry." As Nina stared at Nash's face, she noticed how pale he looked and her eyes widened. His silence filled her with unease and she sensed that something was wrong. Then she felt something wet on her hand and smelled the strong scent of blood. When she realized this horrible truth, her hands began to tremble. Her worst fear had come true. Nash had a gunshot wound to his left chest and blood was gushing out. "How can you say you're fine?" Nina pressed her hand against his chest to stop the bleeding. "You've been shot. You've been shot, do you understand?" Nash didn't want to worry her, so he remained silent. He endured the pain and gently moved her hand away, whispering, "As long as you're okay, we'll be fine after going to the hospital." "To the hospital, quickly!" Nina shouted urgently. The car sped away along the road. 10 minutes later, military vehicles arrived at the hospital in an orderly manner. Nash was rushed to the operating room. Nina was stopped outside the operating room and waited anxiously. Nina sat outside for hours, waiting from dusk till deep into the night, with almost no one around her. The surgery lasted 8 hours. The longer the surgery, the more serious the situation seemed to be. Nina was physically and mentally exhausted, but she didn't dare to sleep, fearing she would wake up to bad news. Finally, the lights in the operating room went out. Nina anxiously inquired about Nash's condition from the doctor and was informed that the surgery was successful. However, the patient was still in a critical condition, and whether he would wake up or not would be known tomorrow. Just then Miranda, wearing sunglasses and luxurious attire, arrived at the hospital in a hurry, looking worried. Her arrival even caused a commotion. She took off her sunglasses and asked anxiously, "Where is Nash? Where is he?" To ensure Nash's safety, soldiers guarded the doorway. A comrade in arms of Nash's, dressed in camouflage, stepped forward and blocked her path. He firmly said, "Captain York is resting and cannot be disturbed." Nina didn't want to give Miranda any more face. She said, "Miss Miranda, you've seen him and you've made a scene. Please leave now. You don't need to worry about when my husband will wake up." Miranda was even more reluctant to leave. "Nina, who do you think you are? You're just a cast-off wife. I'm his wife and he risked his life to save me. You have no right to be here." Nina shouted back. "Take her out. You." Miranda was furious. But the man in camouflage obeyed Nina's orders. They all knew that Nash was injured while saving Nina, and that Nina was Nash's legitimate wife. "Miss, please leave. Otherwise we will forcibly remove you," he said. Seeing the group of tall, muscular men fully armed, Miranda knew she couldn't win this battle. She glared at Nina. "You'll regret it." Miranda had no choice but to leave reluctantly. "You should rest, lady. I'll keep watch." "I'll tell you as soon as Captain wakes up," the man in camouflage suggested. "What's your name?" Nina asked. "James Lang," he replied. "Captain York was once our leader." Nina continued, "Those people, they didn't hurt me but they targeted Nash's heart. Although they missed by a few inches, they were there to kill him. Initially they intended to harm her but Nash got hurt instead." Nina suspected they had been targeting him all along. James hesitated before answering. "Ask Captain York when he wakes up. He'll tell you better." Nina accepted his suggestion. Pregnant, she didn't have the energy to stay up all night. She decided to follow his advice and go home. When she got home, her mother Julia asked with concern, "How are you and Nash doing?" Are you still considering divorce? This was the most troubling question for Nina. Should she divorce Nash? He risked his life for her and now lay seriously injured in the hospital. Asking for a divorce seemed too heartless. Nash was kind to her and she was carrying his child. The best choice would be to have a happy family. She didn't want her child to lose their father. Seeing Nina's hesitation, Julia understood her thoughts. You decide, I'm not forcing you. I think you need to think it over. She gave her mother a reassuring smile. I know, Mom. I'll think it over. In the morning, Nina was woken up by Yvonne's urgent voice. Nina, wake up. It's not good. Nash is in critical condition. Nina's eyes widened suddenly. What? Her heart raced as she jumped out of bed. When did this happen? Just now. They called from the hospital. Yvonne explained. Seeing the missed calls on her phone, Nina's heart sank. Thinking about life without Nash, tears welled up in her eyes. If he died, she would never see him again, and the thought was unbearable. She felt her heart breaking. Nina fought back her tears and quickly got dressed. She knew she had to be strong and get to the hospital quickly. On the way, Yvonne kept comforting her, telling her not to be too sad. How could she not be sad? If Nash died, what would happen to her and their unborn child? Nina couldn't bear the thought of life without Nash. Even if they divorced, even if he didn't love her, it was still better than him leaving forever. She struggled to hold back her tears, too sad to speak or listen to anything around her. Her mind was filled with the news of Nash's critical condition. When she arrived at the hospital, Nina rushed into the ICU. She saw that Nash's comrades all had solemn expressions and Nash was still unconscious. She walked in and saw Nash lying there, eyes closed, face pale. She had never seen him so weak. Nina stumbled to Nash's side, her legs feeling weak. She knelt beside the bed, held his hand, and tears streamed down her face. What's happening? You promised you wouldn't die. You must keep your promise. If you die, what will I do? She collapsed beside the bed and burst into tears. She had never expected to receive such shocking news. She broke down and cried inconsolably. Just then Nash's fingers twitched. Nina thought it was her imagination, but then they twitched again. She thought she was hallucinating due to her grief, and then she felt a hand on her head. If I die, you'll be a widow. I can't let that happen, Nash said in a hoarse voice. Nina's sobbing suddenly stopped. She looked up in shock and saw Nash with his eyes open, smiling gently at her. She was stunned. He wasn't dead, he was still alive. Just being alive was enough. Having experienced life and death, Nash saw through his feelings. He was afraid of losing Nina. He loved Nina. So even in danger, he would protect Nina's safety first. Nash looked at Nina and said, Nina, please marry me again. Our previous marriage was just a contract and it doesn't count. Now I've seen through my heart. When you said you wanted to leave and divorce, I was upset. When you were in danger, I would do anything, even sacrifice my life to protect you. I'm sure I love you, Nina. Nina couldn't stop her tears after hearing Nash's heartfelt confession. Nash gently wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes and whispered, even if the child in your belly isn't mine, I'm willing to. I will love you and the child in the future. After calming down, Nina said softly, the child in my belly is yours. Nash wanted to say something else but suddenly froze. Nina paused and said, it was me who was with you that night when you were drunk. Nash's expression froze for a moment before breaking into unbelievable joy. He tightly held Nina's hand as if afraid that this sudden happiness would slip through his fingers. Is it true, Nina? Are you saying? His voice trembled. Nina nodded gently, her eyes full of determination and love. Yes, Nash. All the misunderstandings, pain, and struggles disappeared with Nina's affirmation. Nash tightly embraced Nina, as if he wanted to merge her into his own flesh and blood. He whispered in Nina's ear, from now on, whether it's rain or shine, I will be your strongest support. I will use the rest of my life to make up for the past, and let's write our own happy chapter together. Outside the window, sunlight pierced through the clouds and shone into the room, bathing this couple who had gone through many trials and tribulations in a golden glow. Their story, like this beam of light, pierced through the darkness and ushered in a new life. In the future they will hold hands and face every dawn and dusk together, cherishing this hard-earned love until the end of the world.